To a panel discussion this morning. We're waiting for beautiful Sally Ranney. She'll be here momentarily. The framework and tools to heal a divided America and reconstruct democracy. The host, the moderator today will be Mathew Schmid. He's the principal for Tree Media, and he'll introduce today's panelists. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thank you, Chip and Sally, who's not here yet, for convening such an incredible convention or a couple of days and having incredible people here. And thanks for having me. I feel privileged. It's my first time on a panel like this. And with me are Bill Becker, president of the Presidential Climate Action Plan, and John Powers of the Alliance for Sustainable Colorado. And they're very accomplished people. They're going to introduce themselves. And we are talking and we're bringing some light to the framework and tools to heal a divided America and heal our democracy, which I think is important work. And everybody who's out there working has to really use what they're doing in thinking about how we can fix the democracy that we live in. And I think this panel can shed some light on the issue. And with this, I will very simply turn it over to Bill Becker.
Thank you, Matthew. Hi, everybody. We have a very humble assignment this morning to explain what's wrong with democracy. That's going to be a little bit tough, but I'm glad this is the first panel because I think you may want to, as we go through the presentations in the next couple days, think about how many of the problems we're discussing or the issues have their root in how we govern ourselves and whether the system of governance is broken or sabotaged or usurped in some way. I think it is, and I'll be presenting some slides about how I think it is. But let me say that I think while we're talking about many, many different problems during this session, many of them are symptoms of an underlying systemic problem in how we govern ourselves. And that's how I'd like to start. You want to go ahead and cue up the slides? All right. So I'm going to be talking about our broken democracy. We blame Putin, probably rightly, for subverting democracy in this last election. And I'm really curious to see how that turns out. But I want to talk about the internal problems, our domestic sabotage of our own democracy. And I want to talk specifically about these 5 things: campaign finance, reapportionment or remapping or redistricting, it's called several different things, voter access, are we giving everyone equal access to the right to vote, the Electoral College, and the fairness doctrine. Starting with campaign finance, I think we all are pretty aware of what's happened in that arena and how much money these days controls politics. The Supreme Court, bless its heart, has ruled that money is speech, corporations are people, and they have a right to free speech, and we cannot limit how much money is spent in political campaigns under certain conditions. And oddly, in one of the decisions, the 2010 decision, one of the justices actually said the general attitude a candidate may feel toward those who support him or the political access such support may afford is okay. In other words, we understand, the justices said, that if you give a lot of money to someone, he's going to answer your phone calls, or she will. But the problem is that access comes with influence, and the Supreme Court didn't recognize that. So we have a very strange system right now governing how we finance our campaigns, and you can see in these 2 charts how those decisions have affected, in the upper chart, the cost of elections. And you can see as the chart goes up, we get closer and closer to the 2016 election. The cost of elections has increased quite a bit. And in the bottom chart, how it's broken out politically between Democrats and Republicans. So since 2010, when the Supreme Court decision, I think, took effect, or the second one did, you can see the influence it's had both in the partisan funding and total cost of campaigns. Bernie Sanders got on this, of course, didn't prevail, but brought our attention to this. Right now, half of the states use public financing, which is good news. It's available to presidential candidates in those states, but not to congressional candidates. And what we need, I believe, is a grassroots movement to vote only for the candidates that use public financing, that accept public financing, and accept spending limits, and refuse to take money from special interests. And one resource that's working on this is Reclaim America, in case anybody's interested in what they're doing and how it could be done at your state. This financing, by the way, is a state-by-state decision. In terms of reapportionment, as you all know, every 10 years we have a census, and following that census, states redraw their congressional maps to align with population trends in the last decade. And this has been dominated by something called gerrymandering, which is seeking partisan advantage by drawing very strange congressional districts, as you can see in these two maps, to try to lock in a Republican advantage or a Democratic advantage. Legislators are charged with that in 32 states, which seems to me to be a little bit of a conflict of interest because they're drawing their own future, in a sense, in these maps. And in many states, 32, one party rules both houses of the legislature, so they can lock up this process in terms of partisan gerrymandering. And it creates perversions in the outcome of votes. In 2014, the Democrats nationwide won 1.4 million more votes than the Republicans, but the Republicans win 456 more seats. So this is a distortion in a way. It's almost like the Electoral College, a strange distortion in the results. You can see here the results of redistricting. In the upper left, it's state governors who control the states. Red, of course, is Republican, blue is Democrat, and the tan is independent. And then the lower left, state legislative trifectas, meaning both houses of the legislature are controlled by one party or the other. And in the upper right, this is how the congressional seats have broken out, I should say, or broken down. And in the lower right, you can see the trend in terms of Democrats that have been elected since 2008. And by the way, I should say, this is not a partisan problem. When we need to fix this, we need to fix it both with people of both parties, conservatives and liberals and alt-right and alt-left and whatever, because we all have a stake in how governance is done in the country. So although Republicans have had an advantage because they've used the system very cleverly, this really is a bipartisan problem. I work with Republicans on my advisory committee who really get this, and apart from partisanship, want to see this system fixed. Voter access, voter suppression, we've heard about this in the news in the last election. In 2013, the Supreme Court removed a section of the Voting Rights Act that required the federal government to review, in 9 states with the histories of racism, review their rules for voter access. And Chief Justice John Roberts in that decision said, our country's changed, we don't have racism anymore, we don't need to monitor these states. Yet in 2016, 14 states imposed voter restriction or voter suppression laws, and 6 of the 9 states, 6 of the states were those who had changed, according to Chief Justice John Roberts. So I would contend that those numbers suggest racism is still out there. Colorado passed a bill a couple of years ago, a voting rights bill that I think is exemplary. It has a few things that could be fixed, but basically I think it's a pretty good model for other states. Again, this is a state issue, but it contains open voting hours, it allows people to register by mail or online, and on and on. You can see down this line, no photo ID required and so on. Interestingly, one of the things that we hear is that felons ought to be given the right to vote once they have finished their sentence or their probation. That right should be returned to them. The Electoral College, we know what that's all about. A couple of people, in fact, 5 times in our history, the candidate who won the popular vote did not win the election because of the Electoral College. And John may mention this, but there's a movement called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, getting states' legislatures to commit to having their electors vote for the person who wins the national popular vote, rather than breaking out the electoral votes as we see them right now. 61% of those votes have been secured in this agreement. In other words, states representing 165 electoral votes have agreed to this compact, and we need 270, so we need more states to sign on to that. Fairness doctrine, this is a doctrine that was, back in the 1940s, was imposed upon media, broadcast media, who had public licenses to broadcast, and they were required to present both sides of an issue. It didn't have to be equal time, but it had to be both sides, so that people got a rounded view, bipartisan view, or a multi-partisan view of the issues. This breaks down what that act required. But in 1987, it fell into disuse and eventually was taken off the books of the Federal Communications Commission. And what we've seen, of course, is the polarization of media stations espousing political agendas and representing only one point of view. And many of us feel these echo chambers have contributed to the partisan gap that we see in the country right now. Going back to funding, you can see how in the energy and climate areas, funding for Democrats and Republicans has broken out since the Supreme Court decisions, where electric utilities are among the top 25, but the second to the last in terms of supporting Democrats. Oil and gas and electric utilities are a little bit higher up on the list in terms of supporting Republicans. And the result is that we have a tremendous gap between what the American people want for their energy and want the government to do with climate change and what we're actually getting. These maps are a little bit small, but they show that fossil fuels are falling out of favor, renewables are falling into favor. The majority of Americans want renewables over fossil fuels, and yet renewables constitute a very small fraction of our energy production right now. And we have a president who's sort of renewing the call, the bullish attitude toward fossil fuels in production. So there's a split between what the people want and what the people get. The results of all this, in part, are that we have no national energy plan, we have no climate action plan, we have no consistent energy policies, no carbon price. There is not any more international conferences in our US commitment to climate change. There's an emphasis on more fossil fuel production, opening up new lands and areas, and there's an all-out war, as we know, on environmental protection in this country. These, to me, are symptoms of this breakdown in the people's ability to express their will through our democratic system. I threw this in because it's curious to me. I have no idea why this is the case, but it appears that we have had a lot of US citizens drop their citizenship after a long-term US residency. I don't know, this is a chart that ends in 2015 before Donald Trump began talking about blocking refugees and so on. So it's a curiosity, and I wonder if it has to do with the quality of our country these days in terms of public discourse. I don't know. David Orr, who you will hear from later in the program, really is onto this. John's going to talk about what he and David have in mind, but David has come to recognize, he's, as you know, an energy writer, an environmental writer. He's come to recognize that the strong democracy is what we need to restore in order to get to those values of environmental values and energy and climate values. Thomas Jefferson said, "The government you elect is the government you deserve." Absolutely right. Thank you. John?
Thank you, Bill. Thank you for teeing it up. My personal mission is to give you homework, to give you something to do. And I'm hoping that my presentation will be queued up. I'm going to give you a small sample of a larger plan. And at the end, you'll see my email address. And anybody who would like to see the larger plan is welcome to email me, and I will send it to you. This is just a representative example of actions people can take. And I'm going to give you the reason why I think you should. This is the challenge statement. The greatest threat to human well-being and our planetary life support systems is the undermining of democracy in the United States, which threatens efforts globally to protect the environment, reduce poverty, deliver quality education, provide health care, protect women's reproductive rights, resolve immigration, and achieve social justice. My contention is that if you don't get engaged with politics, if you don't do it in a meaningful way, and I'm going to try to offer you some meaningful ways, that we are going to continue to lose, not just politically, not just in this country, but globally. So here are your solutions. Now I want you to study this, because this is what absolutely totally motivated me when I first saw this, and I saw this in the middle 90s. So you'll see what, on the one side, the Republicans are doing that's very strategic, very organized, and they're delivering results. And you see on the other side wishful thinking. And if I get one more petition to sign, I am very worried about them, because anybody who signs them thinks that they're doing something meaningful, and they are not. Those petitions are being ignored. You think in this political situation anybody's paying attention to them? They are not. And if I get one more funding appeal from the Democrats who offer no solutions, what they do is they run around and say the sky is falling. Send money, the sky is falling. And I say, I want to invest in a solution. So I'm going to try to set up ideas. This is what we're up against. This is if you have a chance to make a note, you can look at this. It's horrifying and it's scary. This is a marketing agent who is saying that anything is acceptable. This is the origin of a sense of fake news, and this is what we are up against. This is what we're contending with. So do you know what a default judgment is? It's when someone sues you for something and you don't show up and you lose. And that's where we are. That's what that first cartoon is supposed to point out. So I'm going to suggest that the greatest threat to our democracy is the belief that somebody else is going to do it and that that petition is meaningful. It's not. So here's what you can do. And this is a representative example of a larger program. You can support model legislation state by state. Bill referred to some of them. I'm going to repeat some of them. But these are things that can be done state by state that have a national implication when you roll them up through the 50 states. There's nothing we can do right now nationally, federally. So you can support nonpartisan redistricting commissions. California passed an example. It's very complex, but you need to learn about it. You can nullify the Electoral College state by state, which says that we bind in Colorado our Electoral College voters to vote consistent with a national popular election outcome. You bind them. You can require the release of tax returns for anybody who wants to run for president or vice president in your state. In order to get on your state ballot, you must release your tax returns. Automatic voter registration. Colorado has done wonderful things with same day and absentee ballot, but how about automatic voter registration when you turn 18? Make Election Day a state holiday. We'd like to have it be a national holiday, wouldn't we? So, I don't know how many of you are familiar with ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council? Legislation gets introduced in one state and it shows up in many states. There's now a counterpart, 6, the State Innovation Exchange. It is the progressive side of the balance sheet where ALEC is on the other side. Become familiar. If any of you want to hear what you can do individually, it's a range from, if you have an organization, you on your front page of your website can put a link that others have developed to either register to vote or check your registration status. No cost. You can do that tonight, in a sense. The other extreme, the list of actions you can take, it goes from easiest and no cost to hardest and probably beyond our lifetime, which would be, for example, to change the US Constitution to abolish the Electoral College. So Bill, David, Mark Safdie, and others of us are working on a series of, David Orr, are working on a series of gatherings to study the constitutional implications of where we are today and how we may be violating the Constitution, how it may be being violated in the federal government under the current administration. So there can be a gathering in Atlanta, Denver, Los Angeles, and Oberlin College. And it's going to be starting with an academic understanding of what's happening to our Constitution and the threats to it. It's going to go through practical actions that you can make. This is what we are doing. And I only ask you, I plead with you, you cannot be a spectator at this time. You cannot be an observer. Almost anything that we're doing that does not involve politics is simply rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. With that, I will leave you. We'll go back to our discussion, but you guys are a small representation of the larger group that's going to be here, so you have that much more responsibility to take it up and be infectious and get other people to step up and take action, or we are going to lose by simply signing petitions. Thank you.
So I want to tell you a little bit about an experience I've had, which includes everything these gentlemen were just talking about, and takes it another step in another direction, which I'd like to add in. So when we were making the film, when I was making the film, We the People 2.0, I think, which is shown in this conference, about community democracy movement, I traveled all across the states, mainly Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Oregon, and what turned out later to be complete Trump country. And I talked to these guys there, and what I witnessed is people and communities were assaulted by certain corporate activities. Some of them single, some of them many. And the people didn't want those activities around. The communities didn't want them. And they felt that they had the right to express their grievances. And they said, you know, just like the revolutionaries did hundreds of years ago. And they wanted to be heard. So they wanted to stop things that made them sick. Usually, most of them, these activities made the communities, in some ways, made the people sick. And it was things like sludging, like orchards, or public lands, or mining near towns and waterways, fracking in residential areas, dusting, dumping, GMOs, CAFO, you name it. But what they found is that even though they would work through all these democratic processes, for instance, like petitions, or asking your local politicians, or go to your state environmental agencies, that nothing works, and they would get fracked, they would get mined, they would get sludged. And they would stand together as a community. So like 90% of the people would say, we don't want this. So they felt, and these are like, you know, like Republican, rural, hardworking people, that they found that the system and the representatives they believed in, that they voted for, they rooted for, they let them down. And they felt exposed. And what was most disheartening for me to see, and it makes me very emotional talking to these folks, is that the law was stacked against them, and that the representatives that they believed in, the government, that we call the American government, their American government, were against them, and ended up in the law of court and in other situations always siding with the corporations. So besides inequality, we have to understand, everybody's talking about inequality, the wealthy and the poor, and no jobs and stuff. There's another division happening, talking about the subject, divided America. The division is the raiders versus the raided, the assaulters versus the raped and the ridiculed, because not only are they being harmed, then they're being ridiculed. Destructive and abusive corporate activity versus the people that want to go about their lives. And I went there and I talked to them. They want to go about their lives. They want to keep their children safe. They want to get them educated. They want to get them on. They want to do their job. They want to live in a healthy and clean community. And they cannot. They are not allowed to. But experiences like these community entrepreneurs didn't give up. And they rediscovered the solution and framework that was missing. And we call that today the community rights movement. So you don't look at the government, you don't look at the legislature of your state, Washington, it's something similar you said, but you really, and you don't look at the president to fix things, which is another phenomenon, I think, always coming from a European nation, is that we look at the president, the presidential election of fixing all things local. And you don't look at these places, but you look at your own doorstep, your own community, and you seize back the ability to write municipal law. And basically to write a community bill of rights expressing how you want to live in your community. Because people forgot that they were citizens. They forgot that they not only had the right to say no to harm that comes into the community, but they really have a duty to stand up and speak up. And we all know that takes courage. And that's what you're saying. We need to step up and be courageous. So these community rights movements is offering to help put people in little towns like Tamaqua, Pennsylvania, or cities, larger cities like Pittsburgh, to remember that they are sovereign unto themselves and they're sovereign over corporations. And that they have the right to make law and create the world that they want to live in. It has been our observation that when people engage, and this is key, in this activity, in the work and in inquiry, when they create unifying ideas and activities that it bridges the racial gaps, it bridges the political gaps, and they come together as we, the people, as Americans. Now, why is that? Because it's not in the head. It's not in what I believe in, what you believe in. because it comes to the place of living in a safe and healthy environment, and that's where we all agree. But it also activates this activity and it invigorates the democratic process, and it brings positive changes from the roots of this country into the higher branches of our government. And this is sort of what we've learned and we've understood in CELDEF, the organization that we've worked with, and Tom Lindsay, is that maybe we shouldn't look at fixing something from the top down. Maybe we shouldn't run to the states, and they're all in the pockets by the system, in the pockets of these entities, this mindset. But maybe we need to stop, we need to do it from the ground up, town by town, and it is happening in many communities in America, that they are rewriting these municipal laws and putting a Bill of Rights, and they're putting the nature rights in, basically saying, that's an incredible component of this thing, is to give rights to nature. And not just see nature as property to be exploited, to be abused, because you own it and you can do whatever you want with it. It has systems, ecosystems have rights, rivers have rights. It's not the individual tree that stands in your backyard, it is the ecosystem. So this is hard, and we call it, and that's what we call We the People 2.0, our film, and we call it the Second American Revolution. It's a peaceful revolution going from town to town, ground swelling up into the state levels and into the federal levels. It's hard work because it takes time and it takes stamina. And it takes patience and abuse, by the way. Lots of abuse, from corporate abuse and being sued. And to go around and educate folks, and this is what's important, and I think I heard that saying coming from you, is that we need to guide people through a process to first, and this is very important, to first let go and unlearn so many colonized ideas that we have about America and accept the fact that our democracy is not so democratic. And second, that we people have been betrayed and forgotten in a lot of ways, and we need to take charge of our future. And with that taking charge, we're healing the divide that is happening, and that is also being used to implement the corporate powers. So this work is important. All this work is really important, and as John Powers said, it is we can't wait, and it is really in some ways an exciting work. And we will continue to make films about this, and we have a series planned, doing a step-by-step process from how you get from where we are to maybe a constitutional convention. And I hope everybody here can join in, because from what we have seen, people are ready for this work. And things are in place, and we just have to find more ways to bring it to everybody and make them know it's profitable, and it's good. It's good for your life, and it's good for the community. So thank you for coming, and
That's beautiful. I want to say one more thing, too. I think we're going to try to leave 10 seconds for questions, but before that, let me suggest one thing that you can do that's very, very simple. All of you, I'm sure, are aware of the lawsuit being conducted by young people, ages 9 through 21 on the West Coast. It's probably going to come to trial unless the Justice Department is able to block it early next year. This is an amazingly important lawsuit. John talked about the Constitution. It would establish the constitutional right of our children to have a future free from climate change. It would establish the fact that the atmosphere is a public trust and that public officials have a legal obligation to protect it, and many other things. Go to Our Children's Trust and donate some money. These folks are operating on donations and foundation grants against the Justice Department, which, by the way, is trying to defeat them with our tax dollars. So help them have the money to succeed all the way through this lawsuit. It's extremely important. Thank you.
One final comment. Given the political divide that we are in today, and if we want to try to heal and unite people, I think that what Winston Churchill said, something that what democracy is a terrible form of government, it's just better than any other. It ought to be nonpartisan to be able to say we should be taking a stake in protecting our democracy. It should be something that bridges the political divide. So the ideas that I presented and the ideas I'll make available to anybody who contact me should be based on protecting our democracy. It should have nonpartisan appeal, but unfortunately, as Bill pointed out, you all know the golden rule, right? He who has the gold rules. And that's what we're up against. But at least we have a philosophical argument that I think is unimpeachable. We must protect our democracy, and it should appeal to everyone. Thank you.
We're actually 7 seconds over time, so I think we're going to probably have to leave the stage, Barclay.
Can we get a question?
14 seconds. 14 seconds. That's even
No,
more than I
that's
thought.
negative.
That's
Working or not,
Yes.
there it is, now it is. I have no gold, but I have a sterling idea I wanted to share. The two Congress people that I know, Keith Ellison and Representative Pocan, Minnesota and Wisconsin, are going into their neighboring Republican districts, not their own districts, the neighboring Republicans holding town halls because the Republicans won't. And what a great idea, and I'd like everybody in this room to think about that, take it home and suggest that to your neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you. Barclay, I think we have to leave now, right? Yes, sir. Okay. Thank you all.
Thank